And so thank you so much for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Lindsay Johnson. I'm the founder and CEO of FitPros. We are a workplace wellness service provider. And in today's webinar, we're going to focus on the hybrid work environment, offering tools to support your employees both virtually and back in the office. As we all know, more than a year ago, year and a half, almost two, when the COVID-19 pandemic forced most companies to move their employee populations to remote work, our work life and home life was flipped upside down. As an employer, the ability to adapt to the new working culture that is ahead might be challenging to support your staff who continue to work remotely and for those returning to the office. So on top of that, I know that you HR leaders are exhausted and you're just holding it all together. And so we really hope that you'll also take away things for yourself today and those to share with your employees. You are in for an amazing treat with this group of expert panelists we have. We're going to discuss the evolution of a hybrid culture and how to make it inclusive. So we're really going to tap into inclusivity. We're going to talk about what our offices need to look like and what modern workers are expecting and how to support the needs of all of your employees. So today's panelists include Duncan So. He is the founder and executive director at the Burnout Clinic. Duncan has been a child of corporate burnout that has led him professionally into the field of human flourishing for over a decade, working on systematic social change projects. He is a social entrepreneur and a change agent on a mission to create a more passionate, world-building systems and programs for companies and communities on the path of making social good. You're such a good person, Duncan. And we also have Divya Raghavan, who is an orthopedic PT, founder of Right Stack Physical Therapy. Excuse me. Divya has over 11 years of experience. She is among the only 5% of physical therapists in the nation that are board certified orthopedics. She was a PT at Google Wellness Centers for over 6 years before transitioning to start her own private practice, which is Right Stack Physical Therapy. Her expertise lies in finding the root cause of pain in her patients, as well as offering education to the community on effective self-care strategies for pain management. Being a dancer, I didn't know that about you, Divya. Oh, she also caters to the performing arts community and is an editor to Natya magazine for dancers. Beautiful. And then we also have Teresa Lehman, Director of Sustainable Services from Myron Construction, who will be joining us a little bit later. She, as we've all experienced, had a flight delay today. And so I feel very, very sad for her that she is on a flight right now, but she will be joining us very soon. So we're gonna go ahead and jump right in. And I'm gonna start with Duncan here. So Duncan, the pandemic has had unprecedented impact on several aspects of our normal way of living. Depending on where the offices are located, some people have been open for a while, some people are returning to the offices for the first time in months. And as some have put in the chat, some offices are having a really hard time convincing employees to come back to the office. So while some employees might be physically ready, there are chances that many are dealing with that struggle of mental effects from the pandemic still and nervousness all around. So could you share with us, from the lens of mental health, how can employers best decide if a virtual back to the office or a hybrid of both is the best fit for their company?
Yeah, I love this question. It's a very interesting question because it's an employer responsibility, but really when it comes down to getting input, it's the employee needs to get input. So for those who've asked that question, like how do you get employee engagement? How do you get them excited or motivated to whether stay at home, go to the office? This one question I ask to all sort of people managers and HR leads isn't about the physical or virtual environment. It's about the emotional home. Now that's kind of weird, right? Because emotional home is sort of what we feel inside. And so the question is, where, so that's sort of environmental, where might you feel the most anxious, bored? Where do you feel disengaged? Where do you feel unfulfilled? And so there might be parts of it, right? So as they go through sort of that journey of work, it could be, well, when I'm at home, these are the areas where it doesn't work for me. When I'm in traffic, this does not work for me when I'm commuting to the office, or when I'm in the office, this does not work for me. And so from an emotional standpoint, it connects to that sort of engagement factor of, you know, why. We take action based on emotions, right? Energy and motion. And the flip side of it is once you get all of the pain points, then the real questions really come down to where are you the most excited? Where are you the most productive? Where are you the most engaged? Where are you the most creative? And these are the questions that usually, because most people are the I know what I don't want, but asking what you do want, most people sort of freeze. And it's a good thing because when you ask those questions, like 9 out of 10, what usually comes back is that's a really good question. Thank you for asking. And I feel that you care. And that's a really big one when it comes to the employer bringing the employee into the mix. And as you get sort of that group dynamic, because, yes, while you can design for the individual, when you pull all that information out, it'll give you a good sort of big picture strategic view of like, how do I best invest? Do I get more space, less space? Do I make it more work from anywhere or so forth? Or how do I move my budgets around for that type of environment specifically? And secondly, at a very tactical level, HR leaders, my heart goes out to you because the amount of stress and burnout that's going through in the HR community right now is pretty big. So when asking yourself that question is very helpful because then it prompts you like, what do I want when it comes to deciding where to go? And that gives that additional empathy to enable you to ask those questions because you've experienced it yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, so spot on. And it's interesting. All over LinkedIn yesterday, I saw this article about just really getting personal with HR leaders. So I don't know if many of you have seen this. Go ahead and type in the chat if you had, and if there are certain things from that article that called out to you. But at FitPros, we talk to HR leaders day in and day out, and they too. I mean, that's one of the most precious things about my job is like getting to hear all sides of this. And there's so much that lies on HR, and so I think that you hit spot on that that we have to be paying attention to everything. So thank you, Duncan, for that. Divya, last year I had 2 friends at least post pictures of their home offices. And one of which was a workstation where they converted their closet, their very small sort of walk-in closet, to an office. Another one was kind of making a joke of it, but kind of not, because this was the only space they had to go, but right next to their child's dollhouse. And so, people were getting really creative last year. I think a lot of us did break out of that and made more use of our space. It's cute for a minute, but not for the long haul. So what are some changes that people can make to their workstation to make it more ergonomically safe and mentally productive? Because we all know that if employees are, ergonomics is one of the most expensive costs that employers have to deal with. And if they're not mentally productive, they're not into their work, then that's not good for the company either. So can you give us a little bit of insight of how we can enhance our workstations?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for the question, Lindsay. That's great. I think that's reality that people are trying to be creative with their space and what they have. Me living in the Bay Area, space is always an issue, and people are figuring out how to co-share their space with everybody working from home and kids studying from home. I would definitely recommend a few do's and don'ts. So having a place where you can go from a sitting to a standing position easily without disrupting your work would be great. So if you can invest in getting a sit to stand desk, that's awesome, because with the touch of a button, you can go from a sitting to a standing position. But if you're not able to do that, then at least finding another space, probably a kitchen counter or a higher cabinet where you can take your laptop, go there and work for some time, that would be great. And in terms of finding a chair, look for a chair where your low back is really supported. So a chair with a good lumbar support. And if you have a chair, which has a straight back and it's not adjustable, you can use a towel roll or put a small cushion, which kind of gives comfort to your back. Because if your low back is in the right position, then the rest of the spine follows suit. So if you're sitting in a very low chair, like your kid's chair or something like that, where your knees are super bent and back is not supported, it makes you want to hunch forward. And if you're physically uncomfortable and hurting, you can't be really productive at work. So I think it's okay to kind of create a space which a lot of people can use. And one of the things with an adjustable desk is that, spouse, partner, roommates, kids, everybody can use it because it is adjustable.
Thank you for that. It's funny. So I'm sitting on a ball, as if you guys can tell. I'm also 8 months pregnant. And so when Divya and I were chatting on this last call, I was like, Divya, is it okay that I'm on a ball? And so Divya, how do you feel about the balls?
You're doing so well, Lindsay. I had no idea you were sitting on a ball. You were so stable. No, so using a ball is great. At one time, it was like really popular, and everybody was sitting on a physio ball. It definitely makes you use your core muscles more. So it's almost getting a workout while you are just sitting. So I think that's why the rise in popularity. But I have seen people who slouch in spite of sitting on a ball, or who lean forward in spite of having a supportive chair. So ergonomics is the external environment, right? And then posture is your internal environment, and both have to go hand in hand. So talking to the HRs here, if you're investing a lot in getting the right furniture for your employees, that's awesome. You are doing your part. But if the employees don't know how they should sit, what is back pain, how often should they take breaks, what are some stretches they can do during breaks, when should they report if they're having like low back pain or neck pain, so they can be given access to resources, that is really important. So I feel that educating the employees in that regard would also go a long way.
Yeah. And it's got to be hard, I would assume, for you HR leaders out there to find the right information. And so, we just put a article in the chat with some tips, and then we have more on our blog site. Divya, are there any places where you would recommend HR leaders to go and find some resources that they could share with their employees? Because of course we want to make it as easy as possible as we can for them, so they don't have to write stuff. So is there any like sources that you would recommend?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that for the community talks that I do, or the talks I do through FitPros, I go hunting for evidence in PT journals, because you don't want to say something that's a fad or popular and then throw it at people. So I can probably create a document. I don't know where to look for, because I always look for the recent evidence that's out there in the Journal of Medicine or Journal of Physical Therapy, talking about, okay, what kind of stretches are good for a person, and how long should one stand, and especially if you're talking about postnatal, prenatal health, is it even okay to stand for a long time? And so that's where I look for my answers.
Those are really helpful. Great. Those journals, I had no idea about those because I'm not in that space at all. So thank you for sharing those journals. That's fantastic. Thank you. I have so many other questions for you about kind of positioning of the desk, and I know we're going to do some stretches in a little bit, so I'll hammer those questions at you in a little while. But I'm going to turn it back to Duncan, because we're kind of switching back and forth between the mental and the physical here, because it's just such a balance. So I'm going to go back and forth a little bit. So Duncan, in many workplaces, there's still such a stigma around discussing employee mental health conditions. I think the pandemic really helped open some doors, helped loosen us all up to know that, it's safer to talk about mental well-being. But the pandemic has still created, such a curiosity too. I would say that a lot of employers are now, they're desperate to support their employees, knowing that they're suffering, they're burnt out, they're depressed. And so do you have some recommendations on how we can re-engage people back to work as offices are opening back up? So on the mental health perspective, if employees are scared to go back to the office, what are some tips around how to re-engage them, to encourage them to, if they feel safe, to come back to that environment? How can we as HR leaders support them if they don't feel safe just yet? I threw a lot at you there, so take it.
Yeah,
take
so
it as you need.
I'll unpack a little bit of that. There's a lot of great points in there. The first one from the HR space. So I want to highlight stigma first. So pre-pandemic, the stigma was an issue because most people were hovering, like if you look at so minus the burnout sort of reports, but more on the mental health reports, it was generally, if I played the parental principle, 80% was, survival, rather healthy, right? And 20% was those that really got into that crisis, blur between mental health and mental illness type of challenge. And so that's where it became a stigma, because a lot of HR, and I think HR literature and HR feedback in 2020, that's last year, was very clear that mental health became a number one priority. From a, hey, it's a nice to have, it became a number one, if not a two, beside diversity and inclusion. So that was a huge one in 2020. And that's because how I love the parental principle 80-20 rule, how that worked was suddenly the entire world flipped. So from the 20% of the world is having some challenges, now 80% of the world is having challenges. And the general challenges for 2020 were high anxiety, which moved into after you moved into Zoom fatigue in last year's summer, then moving into 2021 is burnout. So burnout's one of the biggest and hottest topics now in 2021. So what I share to HR leaders, just to set a framework themselves so they can have open these discussions, is what we call the mental health spectrum. So I go more specific into burnout through a spectrum, but the mental health spectrum as a big picture to show that, one, yes, there is like the polar extremes of you have crisis, and then you have those that are like flourishing, like they're thriving, they're flourishing, nothing's knocking them down. But the reality is we have things in between, right? So from crisis mode, I call it, the next step up is sort of like survival mode, right? It's, you're stressed, you're struggling, you feel it, but there's just enough resources for you to, one, at least learn some new techniques or whatever it is and move into recovery. And then sort of from recovery, you move into this sort of resilience path, right? Like you're flourishing, you're resilient into thriving. And we drop back and forth all the time because life, right? I mean, when we have life, we're always growing. So even if you're growing and there's change, or you're stagnant and you want change, there's always a movement, an ebb and flow when it comes to mental health. And so the pandemic has been really interesting because, HR leaders now, that stigma is sort of, don't worry about it. And the reason why I say that in terms of giving more confidence is we've all felt it. And it's one of those things where you can just say, has anyone felt anxious this year? Does anyone feel anxious now? Or for those who are on a lot of Zoom calls, it's like black slots everywhere. Before it was in the last year, everything was open. Now it's like, they're there, you don't know if they're there, and there's all these black slots everywhere on the Zoom Brady Bunch, right? And so if employers or managers were to ask, like, just to check in, right? How are you? Like, how are you feeling? If they were to turn on their camera, you'll be like, oh, whoa, okay, cool, don't worry. And everyone's like, yeah, me too. And so because that has opened up, what's really important for HR to look at, and what HR has been doing for this year, especially, and engaging groups like yourselves, like in FitPros, is lunch and learns, is really getting not just managers educated on sort of mental health and burnout and all those things are really popular for 2021, but then also being able to identify that in their employees as well and ask the different questions that really start to build a deeper level of engagement. I call it a deeper level of rapport, like connection. It's more than just engagement, but it's definitely connection. And what's happening now, so sort of latest and greatest right off the press for the summer, and this is only true because if you follow sort of how the pandemic is going, a lot of us are vaccinated now or going into that vaccination mode. And so the world is opening back up. And so rewind a year ago, it was like, nobody move, anything can happen. Today it's like, we're opening back up. Yes, we're a little bit more vaccinated. Yes, there might be a fourth wave, but let's talk about recovery and let's talk about coming back to work. Really important. So in that case, what sort of the shift between let's just educate and intellectually stimulate, now let's get actionable, because we've been a year and a half already in this pandemic and we want to return to work. We feel this. It's not even like a, how do we prevent this, more self-care and go have like a, like a bath. It's like, I'm feeling anxious, I'm feeling fatigued, I'm feeling tired. How do I recover? And so what we're doing now is burnout recovery challenges, like things like that, where you get employees engaged and actually doing things that they can feel the change within them. And then one, that's really great for engagement. And number two, it's really great for taking something as heavy as this and making it more actionable and fun. And most importantly, for managers out there and for HR leaders out there, a really great sort of, I'll use the word report, but definitely analysis that they called sort of the Great Resignation just came out in August. And the notion is we're so fatigued and burnt out that if we don't do anything about it, and if we don't move beyond just intellectualizing it and actually doing something physical, there is going to be a lot of turnover moving into the fall winter season. if we're not careful. So summer into fall, HR leaders out there, just make sure there's, if you want to engage, now it's the perfect time to start.
100%. We just put a blog article that you wrote in the chat there. And one of the things that really stuck out to me is you suggest how companies can get a well-being baseline for their organization. And you list off a few things. So I'm going to ask you to name those in just a moment. But it sounds like in order to really get an accurate view of their organization's well-being, that they need to do these things, and it'll really help dive into the stigma challenge. So do you mind naming off a few of those things that HR leaders could do?
Yeah, so what HR's in a lot of those like great places to work, best and brightest, those type of organizations where it's all about the talent war, right? So a lot of highly engaged organizations last year looked at, how do we start asking well-being related questions, or on the flip side, like sort of how do we hide like disengagement questions or reframe disengagement questions to sort of get a pulse or a glimpse of what mental health looks like. And that's what happened last year, and it was a hit or miss, let's put it that way. And then the shifts in direction, HR started to look at, how do I now have well-being surveys? Like we call them "Are you okay?" surveys. And now these get really hyper-focused because moving into this year, the biggest gap for HR was, I'm not a therapist and I don't want to be a therapist. I don't even know how to ask these questions. And so the good news, and Jennifer Ma, she's been out there with the Harvard Business Review that launched a lot of survey questions in the beginning of January. And even ourselves at Burnout Clinic, we have a survey that we offer for free to managers. And what that does is it says, okay, let's not look at the absence of engagement to assume sort of lack of well-being. Let's just go straight to well-being questions. And what will happen is with these well-being questions is you start to look at different, outcome avenues, but different indicators or different categories of where people are mentally and emotionally as well. And from there, one of the key elements in the questioning process is sort of a subjective scale of, right? If you're never feeling it, sometimes feeling it, to always feeling it, and everything in between. And in a sliding scale, when you ask these pulses, so you can ask other short questions or nice long form surveys if you're not too fatigued with surveys at this stage. Then what you do is the organization begins to get like an idea of where everyone is floating. And if you do it, not a snapshot is great because then you can intervene, meaning it's, well, we have say 10% in crisis mode. Let's get them out there, because get them off of crisis, because they're going to quit. If they don't quit because of, I got to look after myself, they'll quit because of a health issue or something like that, right? And then when it comes to the recovery spectrum, then it's like, okay, now how do we put in, whether it's training or interventions or whatever it is, to move that needle? How do we do that? On the flip side, then measuring people who are thriving, how to then focus them on the existing prevention practices, resilience trainings, EAPs, that type of stuff to maintain it. And where we get a little bit more advanced is you take the same survey, it's nothing different, and you just ask the same survey repeatedly over a period of a longitudinal study, right? Over a period of time. And what will happen is the organization will not just have the snapshot, it will have a live pulse of where everyone is ebb and flowing. And the only thing from a response lens or a readiness lens for an organization to look after is, one, stop bleeding. So if someone's in crisis mode, is that people aren't dropping in, and for those who are there, have to get out. I mean, that's the number one for interventions. And when it comes to recovery and resilience, is making sure that there is a good trend towards pushing towards recovery into more resilient, thriving sort of mental, emotional well-being. And then the maintenance, that's the maintenance part, right? And then double down on maintenance and self-care and all the great EAPs and things that HR have, and benefits that HR has already been good at for the last decade.
That's awesome. Yeah. As well-being coordinators at FitPros, we really, surveys help us so much to design a program that meets the needs of a total population. And without that information, a lot of times HR managers are kind of guessing, or it's kind of hearsay, like, oh yeah, we think that we need to do some family engagement, because employees have kids, or we think that they want to do some stretches and yoga. But man, if they have those surveys, like it's much more helpful. And so I love what you're talking about is like, let's go a little bit deeper. Let's get a little bit more personal, but consistent. So that's super helpful. And Duncan, maybe while I'm asking Divya the next question, if you could find that survey that you have for managers and put it in the chat. If not, we can send it out afterwards. So no pressure there. And then also, Duncan, I'm going to come back to you in a little bit so you can share with everyone what the burnout challenge actually is. So, so we will come back to that. So let me turn it over to Divya. With so many of the world's workforce having worked from home for extended periods of time as a result from the pandemic, social distancing, lockdown, posture, I know for myself, I certainly got that tech neck going on stuff. So posture's gone out the window. How can pain from poor posture be avoided? How do you feel about posture braces? I will say, I know with my big pregnancy belly now, I did buy one of those braces that help when I'm walking to hold up the belly, but I have seen them for just normal everyday posture, maybe for the shoulder. So I'd love to have your opinion on that. And then you talked a little bit about standing desks. Do you think they're just a fad? Do you think that, if we can't afford a standing desk or it's too complicated? You mentioned standing at the counter. Any other suggestions there?
Yeah, I'm sure a lot of people are wondering about these questions, right? Now, talking about posture, right? So how do you know if you have good or bad posture? So I would define posture as a position in which your spine is well aligned, where your ankle, hips, shoulders, ears are like in alignment. Now, some people have structural issues going on, right? Where they have a kyphotic posture, which means that they have an increased convexity in their mid back or thoracic spine, which forces them to have a forward shoulder, forward head posture. Now, some people do not have the structural kyphosis, but have a functional kyphosis where they are sitting incorrectly and leaning towards the computer screen, causing that posture. Now, if somebody who has kyphosis or has scoliosis, which is like an S-shaped curve in their spine, we can't do much to kind of correct it structurally in adulthood, but you can definitely still strengthen some of your postural muscles. So your postural muscles would be like your deep neck flexors, so doing more chin tuck kind of movements. So if you're sitting at your computer and you find yourself kind of being a forward head posture like that, that means you're not engaging your core muscles appropriately. So kind of getting into a chin tuck position, like a slight nod, and staying in that position while you're looking at your screen would be great to prevent pain in the neck. Similarly, if you talk about mid back, having your scapular or mid back, like shoulder blade muscles work by doing a slight shoulder blade squeeze. So there are these core stability exercises that can be done in standing. You don't need to essentially go into a plank to engage core muscles, but learn how you can engage while doing a sedentary activity like sitting and working on your computer. So again, the education about what are these core muscles and how can I engage it without people actually noticing that you're doing that exercise. So that would be great. Now, you talked about postural braces. And this kind of ties into what I said about activating postural muscles. Now, if you use a brace, then essentially you are taking away that burden of contraction and activation, stabilization of the postural muscles, and the brace is doing that function. And so for a short amount of time, it's good, right? So in your case, you're pregnant for this certain number of months, that's when you'll be using it. It might not be a good idea to continue using it postnatally, right? So it's about building those abdominal muscles. Currently, you're using it to reduce strain in your low back, but then also doing some prenatal yoga where you are stretching those back muscles and strengthening the abdomen. So similarly, if somebody feels that their posture is so bad, and in spite of everybody telling them and them knowing that that's what the problem is, they're not able to do it, using it for a short amount of time so that you know what good posture is and kind of have a reminder, tells you when you lean forward, it pulls you back and you're like, oh, okay, I need to kind of sit up straight. Helps. But if you lose it for a long time, then you're weakening those postural muscles and makes it harder. Like sometimes when people use a postural brace for several months and then end up removing the brace, they kind of slouch more because those muscles have not been used for a long time. So I would not recommend that to be a long-term solution. Figuring out whether you have structural spinal issues where you have to kind of work to manage them, or functional issues where you can actually correct them with some physical therapy and exercises would be great. So getting an evaluation, as Duncan spoke about, the surveys to figure out where your employee is. There are different tests that a lot of providers like me do, where you know exactly where is the tightness and where is the weakness, and how do you give targeted exercises or self-care measures for such people. So that would be great. And then talking about the standing desk. So, Lindsay, as I said, that I usually look for evidence to answer such questions, like what do the scientists who have researched on standing desks say? And so I went through this article recently published, which talked about that even 1 minute of standing every 30 minutes would suffice, right? So you don't need to stand too much. All your body needs is a change in position, right? So, but it's every 30 minutes. So, sometimes there are these standing desks, and one of my patients did this where it will automatically automatically start kind of going up, so that you can program it in such a way, or you can have these apps where your screen would go blank, or a simple alarm on your phone which will remind you to stand up. So you don't need a standing desk. Standing desk definitely makes it easier to do different kinds of things where you can do standing tasks. Like I also do physical therapy for manufacturing companies, where it's not just computer use, but they're handling different tools. And so, if you have a standing desk, then you can easily kind of do these things that you can do without leaning forward, or you can do like lifting and carrying work as well. So I feel a standing desk does kind of, satisfy the needs of a lot of people, but you don't need to really have it. It's all about reminding your employees to stand up more often.
So true. So true. What are your thoughts on those little devices that you can put on your back that kind of like zing you?
That's true. Yeah, I think that's like a good replacement for postural braces, because what that device does is that once you go out of this ideal posture, it will send you this kind of electric impulse, which will remind you to kind of sit up straight. So now you are reminded to use those postural muscles. So you are strengthening those muscles. You're also kind of building that neuromuscular pattern where, even without that device, if you are in poor posture, it would kind of, you will tell yourself to straighten up. When I'm talking about this, I'm reminded of my dance education, where I started dancing at a young age of 5, and Indian classical dance is very much like posture. And so my teacher would kind of, gently like hit us with a stick, not so gentle, if we are not in a good posture. So even after growing up, this is like so many years later, if I'm in a bad posture, I am reminded of my teacher, who would be like, no slouching. And so I think these kind of devices just kind of help ingrain that, those reminders, so you're not dependent on your surface where you're sitting in, or in what. It should not be like, okay, when I'm in my office and I have no distraction, I'm reminded, but when I'm out with friends and I'm distracted, I don't think about it. It's something that you should inculcate as, as a value within yourself.
Yeah, 100%. Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. While we're talking about the workstation space, I do have another question for you that my husband actually just popped in earlier today, and he was just like, hey, you guys have all those, PTs and chiropractors that you work with. Can you tell me how to, what level should my wrists be at? So he was asking about the mouse and what level. And then I know, I don't think you're supposed to have your feet dangling. And then there's something about like the eye level of where it's suggested to be. Could you give us just a couple top level tips that maybe HR managers could share?
No, those are great questions. And I can also share like a PDF document, or Ashley can share it. She has it, where it has all these kind of tips and tricks mentioned in it, because sometimes it can get a lot. So if you look from your feet up, which I feel is a good way to start, instead of starting from where your head should be, start from the feet. We want to make sure that the feet are supported on the ground. So don't sit on like, bar stools while you're working, where the feet are dangling. And I say this to even people, who give their office space to their kids, but now the kids have their feet dangling too. So I did this talk for like, parents who are trying to create a virtual space for their kids to do schoolwork, is that the feet should be supported. So again, having an adjustable chair, so that from a petite to a tall person, their feet kind of touches the floor, is important. You want your ankle, hip, and knee to be in a 90-degree position. So you know how sometimes when people sit, they tend to bend their knees too much, or they're bringing their feet forward and crossing it. Not that great. Now, again, it's not about, being in this ideal robotic posture all the time. It's just about, for a majority of the time, try to be in a good posture, right? And your body will thank you for it, and then you'll be motivated to do that more often. You want your low back supported, as I mentioned, and then you want your mid back also to be supported. So some people kind of sit all the way back on their chair where their low back is supported, but then are kind of leaning forward. So your shoulder blade should also kind of feel that the backrest of the chair. And then we talk about the head, as I mentioned, chin slightly tucked. So even when I have set up my space here, the top of my monitor is at eye level. But when I'm looking at the screen, I'm doing a slight chin tuck, right? And I think a lot of people make the mistake of having it too high, thinking that higher is better. And that's not good. You should have that kind of slight chin tuck position. Now, talking about the wrist position, it should be in a, 90 degrees, elbows close to your body and wrists in a more neutral position. So you're typing like that. One of the ergonomists that I used to work with would say that type like you're playing the piano. And so you can let your husband know that, it's not good to kind of use armrests or wrist support when you're typing, because that fixes your joints. And then you're doing these kind of movements of your hand, which can lead to wrist discomfort. Instead, bring down the armrest all the way and let your hands kind of hover over the keyboard. So it's just like you're typing with your fingers and you have this movement instead of doing this or doing that. That makes sense.
That's super helpful. And he does use his armrests a lot. And just like 2 weeks ago, he had one of those, we've all had these, I'm sure, where you can't move your neck all the way. He was like so stiff. And so secret, he's been doing yoga with me at like a few mornings a week. So, I mean, if that's what it's going to take.
Even if it's prenatal, that's okay. At least he's doing his yoga.
Exactly. Thank you so much for that. And again, if anybody has questions, please drop them in the chat for us, because these guys really would love, that's what they're here for, is they want to help you guys answer any questions that you're getting from your employees. So please keep them coming. And I did see that Teresa joined us. How are you? How was the flight?
I'm still up.
Oh no. Oh, okay. It sounds like it's going to be a little chaos there. So we're going to go ahead and mute you for now, Teresa, until it's a little, there we go. Perfect. Well, thank you. It's lovely to see your beautiful face. And so hopefully you'll get settled there in a moment. Perfect. So I'm going to ask both Duncan and Divya this question. So this is a tag team here. So as we gradually return, oh, Duncan's getting all excited. So I'm gonna look at that face. As we gradually return to a pre-pandemic work environment or a hybrid of both remote and office, employers are likely to continue to try new things, which is fantastic that they're willing to dabble and test these things out. So how can they ensure that what is being offered is inclusive and offers work-life balance? I love the word harmony, so we can harmonize things, but work-life balance, and it just make it inclusive. I mean, I think that's the bottom line answer here is last year really woke us up, and I think that a lot of employers are very eager to keep that going. So with working remote and some back to the office, it puts an extra layer of difficulty of driving social awareness and engagement and culture. So let's start, Duncan. What are some recommendations you have on in inclusivity?
Oh, I love this because it goes into my passion of human flourishing. So there is a link between mental health, burnout, and diversity and inclusion, or more when it comes to like identity, right? Who you are and what that means. And so hands down, this is one of those practices that's absolute for burnout prevention and advanced for burnout recovery, and it's values. The big ones, I know like our diversity inclusion folks like, oh, the values, I know about values. But what I want to sort of share slightly differently from for the values lens is how the values engage your neurology. What does that mean? It means that when you do your values work correctly at a personal level. So let me put a disclaimer out here. Most values work is I'm an organization. I have a set of behaviors that I want to create. That's sort of like a set of behaviors that our marketplace or our customers like, or what we want to instill in our culture. But there's in my space, we call that a hallucination. We project those values because we think that's what we want. But values are actually something we imprint as kids inside us neurologically. And why that's really incredible from an engagement lens, a performance lens, from a prevention of burnout lens, and even advanced burnout recovery, is when you understand what is important to you and how you want to spend time internally as a practice, your nervous system actually lights up. And so like when you talk about like how do people find purpose or how do people find passion or all those different really peak performance states, is tapping into that part of your nervous system. And so the exercise, when it comes to what we'll call it work-life balance or work-life harmony, or what I like to call it is work-life fulfillment. So I'll give you two sides of the coin, right? When it comes to a burnout or a mental health challenge lens, is when we no longer begin to do things that are important to us. And this was a huge one come pandemic, because we left the quote unquote left the office to work at home, gave us the space in March of last year to be like, man, I've been really wasting a lot of my time doing some really, maybe stupid things or things that might not be meaningful to me. I got to reevaluate the way I look at work. And that was a huge shift during that sort of summer month. And now going to be moving into the Great Resignation. It's sort of that same process, right? And so what happens is we feel empty, we feel unfulfilled, we feel disengaged, and then a whole slew of mental health challenges start to lay on top of that. Now, when you understand your values, values are interesting from a neurology lens because you essentially tap into your own well of energy. No carrot and sticks. I don't need to give you bigger raises. I don't need to give you, dopamine hits of like, you're doing well, here's the appreciation, all that jazz. Is literally, we're going to design meaning into your work, and it's going to connect to who you are as a human being. And then the challenge for HR leaders and challenge for people managers is, how do I take the values that I want to create for my culture and link it or map it at a personal level to a person's personal values? And when you get that right, you can bring in a career coach, you can do the exercise yourself, or you can even bring in myself to the clinic. Is that level of engagement and inclusion and feeling of belonging just skyrockets, and it's a really magical and amazing experience.
I love that. Divya, do you want to spin off of that on suggestions on inclusion?
Yes, I think that, it's definitely when you're creating a workspace for your employees, it's important to, have that value of inclusivity, because, uh, different chairs are important for people based on their size and structure. And I feel that sometimes when a company like orders chairs, they like this one brand and all chairs are the same height, with the same specifications. But no two bodies are the same, and people have different needs. We spoke about growth, so it's not about catching a moment in time and giving your employees what they need right at that moment, but thinking about they will become parents, and they'll go through some aches and pains. Probably they'll be post surgery sometimes, or they will have different needs. And it's about figuring out what kind of ergonomic space would cater to people of different shapes, sizes, and needs. And that's why a basic way to start with this would be having an adjustable desk and an adjustable chair. And it has a lot of like things that can be adjusted. Like, for example, some chairs don't have the armrests that can be removed, right? Now, for somebody who is typing or clicking a lot, armrest is not a great idea. But if somebody who is reading documents or watching something, armrest is good because it helps kind of relax your shoulders. Similarly, I spoke about how some people structurally have a spine which is like more arched forward or more rounded. Now, if they have chairs which are like completely straight, it will kind of push them forward even more. So having a little bit of like, recline, it should recline a little bit. So again, adjustable chairs go a long way. And then, if you're talking about, people who have foot pain, who have knee pain, having anti-fatigue mats so that they can do the whole standing more often, but they are kind of relieving pressure from their feet, is very important. So kind of thinking about a lot of it. So one of the suggestions that I would have, and I don't know how plausible this is in reality, is to have some kind of, space where people can pick, because I get patients who ask me that, do I need a keyboard that's broken? Do I need like a vertical mouse or a horizontal one? And I tell them that, once I assess you, I can tell you what you need, right? But how will you get that at your office. If there's a way where, people have like a marketplace almost where different kinds of things are available, so that you're not wasting money by buying something for an employee who doesn't really care for it and they would rather go for something cheaper and simpler. So, having options where people can pick and choose, I think that would be a great idea. And again, education comes in here, because what's fancy looking might not be the right fit for your body. So again, having a resource like an on-site physical therapist, or reaching out to FitPros where they can do these surveys and understand what are the needs, physical needs, and then kind of create, give you a list of, okay, these kind of 5 kind of chairs might be good for you. So I think in that way, inclusivity is good, because then the employees feel that, their needs are being heard, taken care of, and the employer really cares. That's what goes a long way in people sticking with the company, because, intrinsic motivation varies. We all have our bad days where we feel we are doing work that has no real value. But when you know that your employer, your manager, your HR cares about you and are trying, even if they're not like, even if they're missing the mark by a little bit, at least they are trying their best. I think that will really help in improving employee morale. And a lot of physical issues that I'm talking about, especially low back pain, has a great correlation with anxiety and depression, right? That's why those numbers have been rising. So it's like a hidden pandemic where, we are focusing on COVID and, and people not being hospitalized and people being able to breathe, but we are getting a lot of more cases of neck pain, back pain, impingement syndromes. And then what are we doing to make sure that the workforce, which is not, not being affected by the COVID pandemic, but is affected by these prolonged issues, so, low back pain, a lot of healthcare dollars are being spent on it. How are we supporting them, getting their voices heard, giving them these options so that they continue to be motivated to come to work, because they know that, okay, at home, I might not get access to all of this. At workspace, I am getting access to these things. There is a way that I can talk to somebody and they will figure out a solution for me. I'm not in this alone. You can have people who can, sit together and discuss, okay, what kind of, ergo furniture, or can we do walking meetings, or have our own social bubble. So I think all this goes a long way. So conversation around it and access to resources is what my suggestion.
100%. Yep. I love that. It really sounds like everybody is different. Like you said, every body is different. And so we really do need to check in on those individual needs. Even when you have an enormous company, that's where the surveys do come in handy. I'm going to drop in the chat here. Teresa actually provided this Harvard Business Review article. It's work from home doesn't have to dilute your culture. So I found some really interesting things in there. And I know at Myron, they did a ton of research on how to support their employees. And they, hello.
Hi. Hello, how are you?
Good. Thanks for jumping in. So I was just sharing,
Yeah.
I mean, you guys had at Myron, you went back to the office after just 6 weeks, right? Could you tell us a
Yes,
little
we
bit
did.
about like the culture specifically, or like some things that you might have done to make sure that culture stayed really strong?
Yeah, so we had a lot of check-ins with our employees and supervisors. We did group chats, like virtual cocktail hour and things that we would normally have done in the office person to person, but we did it virtually. And we really tried hard to maintain our culture. The Harvard article you just referenced states basically that you need to have all your employees in the office for 2 days a week in order to maintain that culture. So we have introduced some flexibility policies, and as a construction company, it's pretty hard to allow everybody to work from home, especially our field personnel, right? They need to be on a job site. And there are just some positions that, receptionists, mail room personnel that just can't work from home. So we instituted a policy that basically is allowing employees to work flexible hours. So they get to choose their 9 hours a day, Monday through Thursday, working anywhere from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. And then on Fridays, we're giving everybody the opportunity to only work 4 hours. So we're trying to prevent burnout, right? And that's what Duncan's been talking about a lot. And what we're discovering is that people are literally giving it all. They're giving 110% because they know they get to go home at noon on Fridays, and they get to have that a 2.5-day weekend. So we implemented that flexibility policy. We're allowing people to work from home 1 day a week, whatever that choosing is. And that has to be pretty much chosen by them and their department leader. So if their department decides that they want everybody in the office on Mondays and Fridays, then they get to choose their 1 day a week, either Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. We only have a couple minutes left here, but I do want to ask you one very specific question that came in from Arista, and they were asking what do modern workers, what are they looking for in a workspace, and how do we keep it safe? So I'm just wondering, Divya gave some really amazing insight on the ergonomics component of it. Are there any top level, in just a minute or two, that you could tell us kind of like what people are looking for in a safe environment, be it in the office or needs it from home?
Sure. So a lot of, I use 2 green building rating systems that focus strictly on people's health. One of them is called FitWell, and the other one is called Well. And they actually have 2 viral modules, so if you will. So FitWell has the viral response module, and Well has the health and safety module. And what those rating systems do is they, about a third of each one talk about the physical built environment. So, social distancing is a big deal, and they want everyone to make sure that they're socially distancing appropriately. So all of our workspaces are at least 8'2" by 8'2", just to make sure that everybody is social distancing. We also have either plexiglass or glass, probably from the 4 foot to the 6 foot height, just to ensure everyone's health and safety. We are trying to incorporate all high touch surfaces to have some kind of silver in it, or another type of material that germs don't stick to, if you will. So for pull handles or other things, we're trying to also make sure that everything can be touch free as possible. So, and a lot of people have already instituted things like the bathroom doors. You can open them with your foot. They have like foot openers at the bottom of the doors. All of our faucets are touch free. All of our hand towels are touch free. We do have hand gel sanitizer throughout the entire office. We have like an EPA approved surface cleaner throughout the office. Employees are encouraged to sanitize their own desks, phones, anything that they're touching. They're mandated to do it in all of the conference rooms and communicable spaces.
I think one of the most amazing things is that you said Myron hasn't had a single breakout.
No,
that is
we have
shocking.
not.
In 6 weeks back to the office, and you guys are just on top of it.
We are, and in fact, I'm super excited to announce the fact that we just earned the FitWell viral response module certification this morning.
Wow.
And then we are, yay! We are working on the Well Health and Safety module, and I honestly am saying with everything I have, if people are going to do anything in the offices, I would strongly encourage you to take a look at those. I think you can put those links in the chat for me.
Yep.
And take a look at those. There's some great evidence-based scientific proof that you can incorporate into your built environments to create safe and healthy spaces.
I love that. And we'll send out the links. I put 2 links for Well and FitWell in the chat, but we'll send out more links in the follow-up email for everybody so that they can know some really great resources. So congratulations on that, Teresa. That's phenomenal.
Thank you. And again, I apologize for all the flight delays today.
We've all been there. We've all been there. So we'll just have to do a follow-up with you. So
yes, I would love that. Thank you so much.
No worries at all. And perfect. I'm just going to quickly the burnout challenge with Duncan. He can give us another overview of it, but a quick one too is that and Duncan, maybe you can find a link that people could do individual the individual challenges, maybe send them to your website for the individual challenges. And then on the corporate level, we're working as a partnership to unroll that to our corporate partners so that you guys can unveil that to your employees on how to really handle burnout. So Duncan can come in early in the week and give us a talk, and then we'll launch the challenge. And it's kind of an everyday program that he's really worked really hard on. So thank you, Duncan, and we'll share more information with everybody in the follow-up email on that. And Divya, we appreciate every time you give a talk with FitPros. You're so phenomenal and really educational. And so we appreciate you for that. And so I'll just kind of wrap up here. We only have about a minute left. There is a silver lining to this pandemic. It has really, I'll say, empowered us to reimagine the workplace, the opportunities to optimize it. But for hybrid to really be successful, it must be well planned and executed. I think that's really what one of the biggest takeaways we've had today. And while the hybrid workplace may seem like an answer for a temporary problem, it's really a solution for future work. I know, being in California, a lot of the companies out here have really invested in how to make it work for the long-term sustainable, because the balance of employee well-being is important. But as we did discuss, so is team building and culture. And so, hopefully you guys took away a few things from today's session about how to make sure you're inclusive. But of course, there's so much more than you can get out of just a 1 hour. So please, visit fitpros.com and we can give you a lot more insight on how to build those inclusive cultures, how to avoid burnout, and really protect your employees' workspace and workplace. So any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We appreciate you, panelists. Congratulations on all of your accomplishments. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Thanks, guys.